Winter in Boston has a way of swallowing sound. The harbor turns to glass. The wind cuts, like it remembers every secret the city ever kept. And even the lights along the waterfront seem to tremble under the weight of January. Inside the old Hampton Hotel, the lobby clock glowed past midnight. The halls were silent. Except for the soft scratch of a pen moving across paper, Emma Hale sat behind the front desk. Air uniforme crisp. Her shoulders tired. She had learned that when the city slept, honesty woke up. So she wrote letters she would never send. They began the same way every time, dear whoever I can't forgive yet. It was cheaper than therapy. Safer than prayer. Each page held something she couldn't say aloud about her husband's addiction. About the loneliness of surviving someone who didn't. About what it meant to raise a daughter who still asked when Daddy was coming home. Even when she already knew the answer, tonight's letter was sharper than the rest. The words came like truth that had waited too long. To the man I could never forgive. She wrote, "You taught me that love without boundaries is self-destruction. You taught me that silence can kill faster than anger. I hope wherever you are, you finally found peace, because I'm still trying to find mine." She folded it carefully, as if closing a wound, and slipped it into an unmarked envelope to shred later. But the phone rang. A guest called down for towels. And, in the flurry of duty, she set the envelope on the counter, right next to a stack of documents, for Suite 902. By the time she looked up, the bellhop had already taken them upstairs, and somewhere, 8 floors above, a man she had never met was about to read a letter that was never meant to find him. Marco Santori wasn't the kind of man who made small mistakes. For 20 years, his name had been whispered in rooms where fear wore suits and trust was currency. These days, he told himself, he'd retired from that life. He still owned the same hands. But he used them to sign contracts instead of orders. When the envelope arrived with his business files, he opened it absently. A few lines of handwritten script caught his eye. To the man I could never forgive. He almost stopped reading. Almost. But something about the first sentence felt aimed at him. He read the whole thing. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and stared at the harbor lights flickering outside the window. The words hit with surgical precision. She didn't know him, but she had carved through the armor anyway. Forgiveness. He had heard the word plenty of times in church as a boy, but it had never sounded like something meant for men like him. He folded the letter and set it on the nightstand, meaning to forget it. He didn't. The next night, the storm rolled in off the water. Emma made her rounds through the lobby, refilling the coffee urn, checking the reservation ledger. The heater groaned. The world outside hissed with sleet. When the elevator chimed, she didn't look up, not until a voice said, low and even, "You wrote this." Her heart stopped. Marco Santori stood there, holding the letter between 2 fingers. She felt the blood drain from her face. That wasn't meant to be read. She managed. He studied her like she was a puzzle, missing its final piece. Then, to her confusion, he smiled softly, almost gently. "Then maybe," he said, "I was meant to read it." For a long second, neither spoke. The lobby clock ticked. The storm pressed against the glass doors. Emma finally found her voice. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," he replied. It was the truth. People forget how rare that is. And then, as quietly as he'd appeared, he walked away, leaving the letter on the counter, folded neatly. Like a promise she didn't understand. Later that night, the hotel settled into its uneasy rhythm. Only the sea was still awake. In the office behind the lobby, Emma counted receipts while her daughter Lily lay on the couch with a book. 10 years old. Curious. Too wise for her age. The girl whispered Italian words under her breath. Practicing from the dictionary, she'd borrowed from the hotel library. "Why Italian Emma?" asked once. "Because it sounds like songs people forgot the words to." Lily had said, "Outside." Thunder rolled. The kind of thunder that felt like warning. At 1:12 a.m. The security alarm on the upper floors tripped. 2 cameras went dark at the same time. 8th and 9th floors. Emma was halfway to the phone when the sound came, glass shattering. Voices shouting. A gunshot muffled by carpet and distance. Her instincts moved faster than her thoughts. She grabbed Lily, pulled her down behind the desk. Heart pounding loud enough to drown the rain. Seconds stretched. Then more shouting. More silence. The elevator doors opened with a single soft ding. Emma rose slowly. A man stumbled out, holding his side, not bleeding, but shaken. Marco, behind him. 2 of his men wrestled someone to the ground, an intruder in black. Another bodyguard spoke into a radio. Voice clipped and calm. Attempted entry. He said, "Neutralised." Emma met Marco's eyes. He looked at her, as if measuring something fragile and powerful at once. "You called security?" he asked. She nodded. "I saw the cameras flicker. I didn't think. I just... Good," he said. His tone carried no command. Only respect, for a man used to controlling everything. Gratitude felt foreign on his tongue. But it was there. Real. He looked down at the floor. At the broken glass, glinting under the lobby lights. And then back at her. "You and your daughter," he said quietly. "You can't stay here tonight. This is my job," she protested. He shook his head. "Jobs can be replaced. Lives can't." "I don't even know who you are," she said. Voice trembling. "Someone who's trying very hard not to be who he was," he answered. When the police arrived, the intruder was already gone, spirited away by the kind of silence that money buys. The reports were brief, the apologies shorter. By dawn, the city looked the same. But something invisible had shifted. In her locker, Emma found the letter again, folded between her schedule and a small envelope. Inside, a business card, Marco Santori, and a single line in handwriting that was definitely not hers. "Forgiveness isn't always earned. Sometimes it's offered." She stared at it, unsure if she felt comforted or terrified. That afternoon, as she prepared to clock out, she noticed something on the lobby floor near the desk. A brass shell casing, faintly tarnished, half hidden by the rug. The kind of thing that didn't belong in a hotel built for peace. She picked it up, heart heavy, mind racing. The casing was cold, real, and in that moment, she understood what Marco meant by, "You can't stay here tonight." She called Lily, from school early, packed a small bag. When the black car pulled up outside the hotel just after sunset, she didn't hesitate. She opened the door and climbed in. Holding her daughter's hand, Marco sat across from them, silent, his eyes unreadable. The city lights flickered through the tinted glass as the car pulled away. Emma didn't know where they were going, only that the life she'd been trying to rebuild was now behind her, and for the first time in years, fear and hope felt almost the same. That night, 2 strangers met, one who still believed in forgiveness, and one who didn't know what it meant anymore. Some letters are meant to be read. Others are meant to change the people who read them. Outside, the city vanished behind falling snow. And somewhere between danger and destiny, 3 lives began to rewrite themselves. The road to the coast felt longer than maps admit. Winter faded to iron blue water, and wind that smelled like salt and second chances. Marco's estate rose from the bluff, like a promise someone had tried to keep and failed. Stone and glass, elegant and empty. Watching the ocean like a penitent, Emma told herself it was temporary. Just until it's safe. she repeated, the words tasting like a lie that meant well. Lily pressed her face to the window, eyes wide. It looks like a castle, she whispered. Emma didn't say that castles were built to keep out danger, and sometimes to keeping kings inside. The house held its breath. No servants moved along the corridors. No music drifted from hidden speakers. Rugs softened the floors and swallowed footsteps. The walls remembered voices and refused to echo. Somewhere, a clock ticked with the patience of old houses and men learning to be new. Marco surprised her by not filling the silence. He gave them rooms with locks on the inside and showed Lily how the windows opened toward the sea. For air, he said. As if air were a luxury he had to remember to share. He pointed out the kitchen, the study, the library that smelled like cedar and choices. Then he stepped back, as if proximity might feel like ownership, and he wanted neither. There were no orders. No curfews disguised as courtesy. Eat when you like, he said. Sleep when you can. He left his number on a scrap of paper and placed it beside the kettle, like a note to an old friend. Emma couldn't tell if he was being careful with her or with himself. That first night, the ocean knocked softly against the cliff, and Lily learned how empty houses exaggerate the sound of wind. She fell asleep anyway, murmuring Italian words Marco had taught her on the drive. Buonanotte. Stella. Mare. Good night. Star. Sea. Words that fit inside a small mouth and made large things gentle. Morning arrived on light feet. Marco moved through the kitchen with a competence that looked borrowed. He burned the first batch of toast and laughed under his breath at the audacity of bread. Lily entered, hair wild with sleep, and he greeted her like the rarest guest. He showed her the vowels again. Patient estide. E. I. O. U. She repeated them like prayer beads. Emma watched over the rim of a coffee cup, surprised at a calm she hadn't requested. Men of power were often impatient with small rhythms. Marco didn't rush the lesson. He let Lily stumble, let her grin at her own mistakes. Let the morning be human. It was the first truly disarming thing about him. In the days that followed, a routine gathered itself without ceremony. Emma found the pantry and cooked because cooking had once made a home out of a place. And perhaps it could again. Lily discovered a study with tall windows and an old piano under a sheet. She pulled the cloth away and pressed a key. The note hung in the air, as if startled to be called back to service. Emma sat and tested the instrument. It was out of tune in the way. Memory is imperfect but intact. She played a fragment from years ago, a song her husband liked before the bottles took the melody away. Marco paused in the doorway and didn't enter. As if the music had drawn a border he would not cross without being invited. He listened with his hands in his pockets and his head slightly bowed. The posture of a man paying respects to something finer than he has been. She finished and stood, embarrassed by how exposed music makes a person. It's been a long time, she said. It hasn't, he answered softly. Not for the piano. He glanced at Lily. Or vorher? The house had rooms that refused them. Emma noticed Marco avoided mirrors the way some men avoid altars. And there was one door he never opened. He passed it with a learned blindness. The kind that takes practice. She sensed history there. Not cruelty. The kind of room where a life was rehearsed and then discarded for the next act. At dinner one evening, over simple food and the steam of a kettle, he admitted what the walls had already confessed. I was born into a family that confused loyalty with fear, he said. Emma stirred her tea. Fear keeps people quiet, she replied. Loyalty makes them stay. He met her eyes and nodded once, as if a verdict had been reached. Not against him, but for something neither had known how to defend. Night made the ocean louder. That was when houses like this told the truth. They measured footsteps. They catalogued size. They asked questions without asking them. Emma lay awake and realized she could not tell whether she trusted him because of what he did or because of what he refused to do. On the fourth day, peace cracked along a hairline fault. Emma carried folded towels down a corridor meant for ghosts and heard two men speaking in a careful undertone near the service stair. Their words were not meant for anyone's ears, but some words volunteer anyway. Names. Locations. A sum of money that turned loyalty into arithmetic. She didn't understand the language, but she recognized betrayal in the rhythm. When she stepped into view, the men startled, then smiled the way men smile when they mean to hide teeth. She passed them without comment, and felt her pulse learn a new tempo. She found Marco in the library. Posture straight as a promise, broken and mended again. "You said this place was safe," she told him. He didn't pretend. "No place is safe," he said. "When you stop lying to powerful men." It wasn't an apology. It was a weather report. "Then we're leaving," she said, and surprised herself with how quickly the verdict arrived in her mouth. He didn't argue. He didn't explain the economics of danger to a woman who had already earned 2 degrees in it. He simply nodded. "Pack light," he said. "We go now." They drove again, the estate shrinking behind them without drama, as if it had always known it was temporary. The ocean kept their secret. The road turned intimate, then narrow, then private. The cottage appeared like a memory kind enough to come when called, paint-weathered, steps uneven, windows clear. It didn't look like safety. It looked like truth. Inside, defenses fell not with a crash, but with a sigh. The rooms were small enough to insist on honesty. The kitchen understood hunger and did not pretend otherwise. The sofa kept the newness of old upholstery. On the shelf, a jar of shells, labeled in a child's hand, estate estiva, summer remains, here. Marco cooked. It shouldn't have, but it looked right on him. He failed at first pasta, surrendering to the pot like cowards, and Emma teased him the way friends do when they trust. He took the teasing like medicine. Lily danced between them, ferrying forks, arranging plates with ceremonial precision, announcing an imaginary guest list of saints and poets. They ate badly and laughed well. Laughter, Emma discovered, is how rooms get christened later. When Lily slept with a book on her chest and a lamp, making a halo of her hair. They talked like people washing what's fragile. Marco told the truth. Not all of it at once, but enough that the rest became possible. His father murdered at a dinner called Peace. The empire landing on his shoulders at 22. The first year spent learning how to speak with violence, and the later ones trying to stop. "Everything I built was fear," he said. "Everything I lost was love." She didn't flinch. "Then build something love can live in." The sentence hung in the room like a small, brave light. He looked at her the way men look when they recognize the voice they've been trying to imitate. Sometimes the hardest confession isn't what you've done, it's who you became to survive. They fell into an ease that felt preordained and undeserved. It was not romance exactly. It was recognition. A nearness that made the air feel warmer without touching the thermostat. The moment before a kiss that might not need to happen to be real, the cottage kept them. The sea argued with the shore like old friends who enjoy being wrong together. Lily collected flat stones and made a village on the porch where doors were drawn and people were dots. Marco repaired a squeaky hinge with a patience that suggested penance. Emma washed dishes and let the water be a metronome for the thought she was learning to keep. It ended on a Tuesday because danger doesn't keep a calendar. The first sign was a gull, startled too sharply into air. The second was the dog down the lane, lifting his head and refusing to settle. The third was the faint tremor of glass, as a vehicle crept onto a road that wasn't supposed to know tires. Marco heard it first. The way men learn to hear the past, even when it arrives disguised as the present. He moved toward Emma without haste and without scare. "Pantry," he said. His voice a soft command that made the idea of disobeying sound absurd. Now, Emma seized Lily's hand. The pantry smelled like sugar and old apples. The walls closed in and made a room out of breath. She knelt and pressed her palm gently over her daughter's mouth, not to silence her, but to share the rhythm of calm. Lily's eyes were wide and bright, but dry. The child had learned bravery young, and was tired of the lessons. Above them, windows broke in syllables that needed no translation. The cottage refused to yield quietly. Furniture scuffed. A lamp protested and died. A man's boot slipped on a rug that had not been warned. And then the sound language cannot name two lives deciding whether to stop. Emma could feel the cottage listening with her. She thought of all the letters she had written to men she couldn't forgive, and wondered if forgiveness ever begins in rooms like this, with a mother and a child, and the fragility of a door. The noise changed its shape. It became geography. A struggle moved from the main room to the hall, then out to the porch, then back again. A body met a wall, and the wall will remember. Silence arrived. Not triumphant, but exhausted. Footsteps approached the pantry. Lily's fingers tightened. The door opened and made a small sound of relief. Marco stood there, breathing the complicated breath of the spared and the spent. Blood darkened his sleeve. It was not the life-ending kind. But pain had been invited to stay. He didn't speak until Lily leaned forward on her knees and studied him like a surgeon. "You're okay," she decided. As if she were in charge of outcomes, he almost smiled. "I am now." They moved to the kitchen table because kitchens are where aftermath sits. Emma boiled water she didn't need, and found the medical kit she'd seen earlier, labeled with a military neatness that hurt to look at. Her hands trembled, then remembered how to be brave. She cleaned the wound, threaded the needle, and stitched his skin with the care of a woman who has mended more than fabric. "You shouldn't have to live like this," she whispered, the words escaping before she could decide whether to keep them. "Then help me stop it," he replied, the answer arriving from a place beneath the pain. He reached for his phone and dialed a number, like a habit he planned to break. His consigliere answered with the voice of a man who had stood at the edges of too many maps. The old code demanded response. It always had. "No retaliation," Marco said. Before the council could begin the liturgy, "This ends tonight with peace." The line went quiet in the way loyalties do when they meet a foreign word. "They came to your door," the man said finally, as if the geography of the attack required geography in return, and left on their feet. Marco answered. Or didn't. He exhaled. "Either way, it stops." "Boss." "Marco," he corrected, surprising himself with how much the name felt like rescue. "You heard me." He ended the call, and the room exhaled with him. Outside, the ocean applauded once, and then remembered itself. The house adjusted its shoulder under the weight of a new rule. Power would bend toward mercy or not at all. Lily slid a glass of water across the table with ceremony. "For peace," she said. He took it like sacrament. "For peace." He agreed. They slept in shifts because bodies don't trust good intentions immediately. Morning arrived, and the seaside light poured through the windows like forgiveness that didn't require permission. The cottage kept its quiet. No cars approached. The dog down the lane returned to barking at irrelevancies. The gull took back its sky. In the hours that followed, ordinary tasks felt urgent in their innocence. Marco swept glass slowly, as if apologizing to the pieces. Emma washed a blood stain from a shirt and watched the pink unfurl and fade down the drain. like sunset leaving the horizon. Lily rebuilt her village on the porch and added a school at the center. They spoke little. Words had worked hard and needed rest. Be late afternoon. The old panic had not returned. It lingered at the border like a trespasser, deciding whether to become a neighbor. The cottage learned their names and pronounced them correctly. Marco stood by the open window and let the sea air prove its point. No retaliation, he said again, to the water this time. Because some oaths must be repeated to more than men. Emma joined him, shoulder almost touching. You meant it. I mean it, he said. I don't know how to run a life like that yet. But I mean it. Learning is allowed, she said. For me, for anyone who wants to keep what they love. He turned the words over like coins and decided they were currency in this new country. He felt the house relax around them. As if beams and nails could approve of vows, they ate at the small table with the scar from someone else's knife. Lily told a story about a teacher who used the wrong word for star, and how she had corrected her with kindness. They laughed. The laughter sounded less like defense, and more like habitation, when night fell. It didn't threaten. It tucked them in. Emma opened the window a little wider, and let the ocean write its old letter to the shore. Marco sat in the doorway of Lily's room, until her breathing found its simple cadence. He rose quietly and returned to the kitchen, where Emma waited with tea that had decided to be both bitter and sweet. Is this what it looks like, he asked, as if describing a constellation. What? Choosing peace. She didn't answer in philosophy. She touched his bandaged arm with 2 fingers and said, It looks like this. And it looks like tomorrow morning. And the morning after that. He nodded. The house, which had once been a room with a fight, became again what it had promised to be when they crossed its threshold, a place where people could be worth the cost of saving. Outside, waves turned themselves over like pages. Inside, the 3 of them occupied a small square of mercy in a world that had never learned how to count it. Power old. Stubborn. Heavy shifted at last. The way a great ship shifts when it decides the harbor is safer than the storm. And for the first time in his life, Marco Santori felt the weight on his shoulders lighten because he had set it down, not because someone had stolen it. He sat with a woman who refused to be bought and a child who spoke fluently in hope. And he realized he was not losing anything that mattered. He was learning how to keep it. 6 months later, the sea remembered everything, but refused to speak of it. Morning light stretched across the harbor in long, forgiving strokes. The air smelled of salt, coffee, and new beginnings. On the corner of Main and Ocean sat a small cafe painted the color of dawn. The sign above the door read Harbor Light letters hand-painted by a woman who no longer needed perfection to feel proud. Inside, mugs clinked. Laughter hummed low. And the day moved at a gentler pace than the world beyond the docks. Emma Hale stood behind the counter, hair tucked loosely, apron tied like a memory she'd made peace with. Her hands, once accustomed to ledgers and luxury, now belonged to flour and warmth. She poured coffee for fishermen, who spoke in tides, for tourists who wanted to be part of the quiet, and for herself, when she needed to taste proof that peace could, in fact, be brewed. In the afternoons, Lily would come running from school, her backpack thudding against her back, her face still bright with curiosity. She wiped tables, refilled sugar jars, hummed songs she learned from Marco. Words half Italian, half laughter. Their world was small, but it was whole. And wholeness, Emma had learned, was the rarest kind of luxury. Outside, the sea rolled and sighed. The newspaper on the counter spoke in headlines about corporate collapses and missing names. Santori Holdings officially dissolved. Marco Santori's whereabouts unknown. To most, he was a ghost in a tailored suit. A story whispered between businessmen and priests. Emma read the headlines once, folded the paper, and placed it under the coffee machine. Some stories didn't need closure, only gratitude. But every morning, when she unlocked the door and saw the horizon, part of her still listened for an engine, for footsteps that would sound like unfinished business, turning into peace. That afternoon, when the sun leaned west and the cafe had emptied to a hush, a black sedan parked quietly by the curb. No tinted glass this time. No guards. No shadows. Just one man stepping into the light like it belonged to him again. Marco. He looked smaller somehow. Not in stature, but in burden. His clothes were simple. A grey sweater. Dark jeans. The kind you wear when you've stopped performing for the world. His eyes found Emma through the glass. And she froze. Not from fear, but from recognition of something she'd almost stopped waiting for proof. That redemption can keep its promise. He opened the door, and the bell above it chimed like an old friend remembering a tune. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy with all the words they had already said, and the ones they didn't need to anymore. "You kept the name," he said softly, nodding to the sign outside. "Harbour Light." She smiled faintly. "You told me once that light belongs to those who survive the storm." He looked around the cafe, the tables, the flowers, the small imperfections that made it real. "You did more than survive," he said. "You built peace." "And you," she asked. "Did you find yours?" He hesitated, then placed a folder on the counter. Inside, embossed in gold, was a single line, "The Hale Foundation for Children of Lost Fathers." "It's in your name," he said, then looked toward the window, where Lily's drawings hung like stained glass. "And hers." Emma opened the file documents. Funding. A list of programs, schools, language courses, scholarships for kids who'd grown up in the same kind of silence she had once known. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You didn't owe us this." Marco smiled. Not the polished, public smile she remembered, but the kind that starts inside and forgets to hide. "I don't owe anymore," he said. "I choose." The words landed softly, like stones finding their rightful place in the foundation of something lasting. The door burst open, and Lily ran in, cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes bright with pride. "Mom, look." She held out a crumpled paper with glitter along the edges. "I won the essay contest," my teacher cried. Emma laughed through tears. "What did you write about?" "Forgiveness," she said. "I wrote that forgiveness doesn't mean saying what happened was okay. It means you stop letting it own you." She turned to Marco. "I learned that from him." He crouched down to her level, something paternal flickering across his face before he caught it. "That's my girl," he said, then paused, as if realizing he'd crossed a line. "Sorry. I meant." Emma touched his shoulder. "You can say it." He looked at her, then at Lily, and the apology softened into acceptance. "That's my girl," he said again. And this time, it sounded like a blessing. They closed early that day. The three of them walked down to the pier where gulls circled lazily and the horizon stretched out like forgiveness itself. The boards creaked beneath their feet. The water moved like a heartbeat, steady, certain, alive. Lily skipped ahead, collecting shells and naming them as if she were giving each wave a reason to stay. Emma and Marco walked slower, their silence filled with everything they had survived. After a while, she asked, "Why here? Why today?" He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a new tattoo on his forearm. Simple script, black against skin. "Pax per amore." Peace through love. He translated. It's the only language I still believe in. Emma's eyes shimmered. Your father would have said it was weakness. My father was wrong about many things. Marco said, power keeps men ally, but love keeps them human. They reached the end of the dock, where the sea met sky and the light turned to gold. He looked at Emma, not as a savior, not as a penance, but as a partner in the quiet rebuilding of a life. Do you ever think we deserved this? He asked. She smiled. No, but I think we earned it. He nodded slowly, watching the sunlight on the water, as if the ocean itself had answered his prayer. Behind them, Lily laughed, the kind of laughter that carries across years and heals things you didn't know were broken. Their shadows stretched long across the planks. 3 figures joined at the edges, bound not by blood or obligation, but by choice. Some stories end with revenge. The rare ones, the ones worth remembering, end with a man who learns to protect without destroying, and a woman strong enough to believe he could. Because survival is only half the story. The rest, the better half, is forgiveness. The sea kept its rhythm. The light stayed soft. And somewhere between the crash of waves and the whisper of wind, 3 hearts once shattered, once lost, finally beat in time. If this story touched your heart today, let me know down in the comments which moment stayed with you most. The letter that started it all, the night they chose peace, or the walk by the harbor. Tap the like button if you believe love can still change people. Share this story with someone who might need a little hope tonight. And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss the next story, where love finds light. Even in the darkest places. Thank you for listening. This was the Harbor of Forgiveness. Until next time, keep believing in second chances.